I'm Chris Daniels, Executive Director of the American Jail Association, and welcome to the eighth episode of the American Jails podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about make or break jail maintenance. This topic matters, right? Now, because we are seeing once again how deferred maintenance can quickly turn into safety and security failures. Recent events in Louisiana brought this into very sharp focus, specifically at the St. Landry Parish, a dedicated jail maintenance property. Tax reportedly generates between $750,000 and $800,000 each year. And despite the funding, photos and videos released show serious deterioration inside the jail, including rusted metal ceiling tiles, damaged walls, and compromised security areas. So public statements from the parish leadership and the sheriff have highlighted disagreements over how maintenance dollars are prioritized and what qualifies as critical repairs and who is responsible when a parish owns the jail but the sheriff operates it. This situation is not unique, right? Across the country, many jails operate in aging facilities where the funding authority, ownership, and operational responsibility are divided. When maintenance is delayed or minimized, the results are often predictable: increased risk, higher liability, staff frustrations, and a loss of public trust. Today's discussion is not about assigning blame. It's about why maintenance and inspection are make or break issues in jail operations and what we as leaders can do to protect staff, inmates, and the communities that we serve. So today we have a couple guests with us that I'd like to introduce. First, Shaun Klucznik, who's the president of the American Jail Association and a jail administrator in Florida, along with Cory Godwin, jail services coordinator for the Florida Sheriff's Association. Shaun, let's start with you. Please introduce yourself and say hello to everyone.
Well, good day, everyone. I'm going to say we're recording this on a Friday, so it's a happy Friday. I am Shaun Klucznik. I've been the president of the American Jail Association since May of 2025. I've been on the board since 2021, working in jails now for almost 29 years. And this topic is something that I'm very passionate about. Had the opportunity about 15 years ago to come up and play a role in being part of the transition team of us taking our facility back over from a private vendor where there was no concern for maintaining the building because it wasn't their building. And honestly, there was very minimal oversight going on 15 years ago. And I can say 15 years later, this place looks and smells a lot better. It is a lot safer. Still a lot of things to do here in particular, but I can guarantee you, you'd never see anything like we saw as in the prelude Chris was talking about in my facility, and Cory would verify that probably not a single facility in Florida. There's reasons for that, and we'll probably get into that, but I'm excited to be here, and I want to thank Cory for joining us too.
Yeah, thanks, Shaun, for being with us today. And Cory, if you could please introduce yourself.
Absolutely. I guess probably the first thing that could highlight, on my resume to be most important is I'm a dear friend of Shaun Klucznik. He is a trusted colleague, and since taking this role as jail services coordinator for FSA, he's been tremendously supportive, and I don't know that there's a week that goes by that he and I are not talking or at least chatting. Normally that happens about 5:30 a.m. his time. You guys that are familiar with him, and I'm in a different time zone, so that's about 4:30 my time. So we get up early and slay the dragons before daylight. But I am Cory Godwin. I'm the current jail services coordinator for the Florida Sheriff's Association. I was privileged to accept this position 3 years ago after retiring after a 34-year career that started at age 19 as a correctional officer with the Florida Department of Corrections, and making my way across the state in various roles that we'll get into probably as we go further, including 6 years in central office where I was in the Security Operations Bureau and then later vice chairman of state classification. Probably one of the highlights of that time in Tallahassee is I spent a good portion of those years serving as our security threat group or gang intelligence coordinator that got me the privilege of going out to 23 other states working with the National Institute of Corrections as a consultant to help agencies do that. That was a pivotal moment for me because I got to see how other states operate and the differences between what they're doing and what we're doing in Florida. Some better, some some not. Opportunities to improve. My last position was the jail administrator or jail director for the Walton County Sheriff's Office that's located in the Panhandle of Florida. For demographics reasons, it's somewhere between Pensacola and Panama City. Most people will think about our beaches in Destin, that area, Sandestin area. I do have a degree in organizational leadership. That's my passion. I think everything begins and falls on leadership, including the topic that we're talking about today, and have a vast experience in doing inspections, operational reviews, and really just serving those jail administrators and their command staff in Florida as the jail services coordinator. What is my job? What do I do? I'm going to simplify it. I'm the single person at the Florida Sheriff's Association that has responsibility for jails, and nothing great can ever happen with one individual. So I'm relied upon folks like Shaun and these other jail administrators to collaborate. So my job is to cause connection, collaboration, and build community among those jail administrators in the 67 counties in the state of Florida. A little bit for our listeners that are out of state. In Florida, the 67 counties, the vast majority of those jails are ran by the sheriff. There are 10 exceptions to that where the county runs the jail. They've decided. In Florida, the statute ultimately says the county board of county commissioners in all of those 67 counties has responsibility of the jails. The majority of them have seen the benefit and placed that responsibility under the sheriff. So that's the reason for that. 10 have not. 9 of those are run by the board of county commissioners. There's one anomaly to that, and one of our counties is actually ran by a third-party contractor. And from an FSA standpoint, we treat all of those the same. We serve them all the same. They get the same communications I send out to any sheriffs, and they're also subject to the inspections that we're going to talk about. So that's the role, provide specialized training, whatever I got to do to make them successful.
Okay. Thank you, Cory. And Shaun spoke very highly of the standards when it comes to jail maintenance in Florida. And obviously you guys have some Florida model jail standards in place. Could you talk a little bit about those, describe those in the process, and how that does promote consistency across the Florida jails?
Yes, I'll try to be brief on this one too, because it's quite lengthy, but there's been some form of minimum standards that are required of county jails in place in Florida as far back as the 70s. So at the time when it was first conceived, the Department of Corrections actually had the responsibility for those inspections and that oversight over the county jails. That changed later in around 1996, where the legislature decided to remove that from the Department of Corrections, hand it over back to the responsibility of sheriffs, with the Sheriff's Association being the primary administrator of that. At age 23, I was one of those prison inspectors assigned to the South Florida area. The first jail I ever inspected was the Miami-Dade County Jail, that's baptism by fire to walk up to that one and be the first one. But the legislature saw benefit in modifying that, making the change, and established, probably one of the most important things they did was establish an appointed commission to oversee all of that. And as we sit here today, the commission consists of 7 individuals. There are 3 elected sheriffs, a county commissioner, a seasoned professional jail administrator from a county-ran facility, so they saw the benefit in that. And then a couple of years ago, in a very smart move, the legislature also added to that commission a licensed physician and a licensed behavioral health or psychiatry position to that commission. I don't have to explain to anybody listening to this podcast why that's important with the issues we have to deal with medical, substance abuse, opioid addiction, and certainly the behavioral health issues that we have become, the catalyst for. So that commission oversees, reviews any standards, recommendations for changes, and all of that. So all of that results in a comprehensive, Florida Model Jail Standards Manual that every jail is not only equipped with, but they're also mandated to require with those minimum standards to operate a jail in Florida. The obvious result of that is consistency. It gives some insurance or some confidence that all jails, regardless of when they were built, their design, every jail has its own DNA, its own rhythm, organizational rhythm. Some are more focused on programs than others. Others have different funding, the availability of funding. But this is just an across the board expectation of all jails. How that's accomplished is every one of those 67 counties, and the full blueprint of those 67 counties is 92 individual facilities, because you'll have satellite locations, work camps, whatever we got going on. But all 92 of those facilities are going to get an annual inspection that is conducted by certified FMJS inspectors. They're also going to get a medical inspection. Sometimes that is simultaneous with this jail inspection. And then 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, the legislature also added to that an unannounced inspection, where we're going to show up after you've completed your annual. You have to wait 120 days. That's what they wanted, because they wanted a gap between there. And then, a group of inspectors are going to show up on your front door and knock on the door and say, we're here to inspect your jail for compliance. The model jail standards have 22 chapters. It's very comprehensive. I would just encourage everyone. We're going to share our website, floridasheriffs.org, that they can go and download this thing. This thing's publicly available where everybody can see it, and take a look at everything there. But for the importance of this conversation, many of those chapters deal specifically with maintenance. There's individual chapters on sanitation. There's physical plant. We even have a chapter that is dedicated to construction standards. If you're going to do an expansion or build a new jail, this is the expectation. To become a certified inspector in the state of Florida, you have to go through a 40-hour course. That's an in-classroom course that we put on. We put on about 2 of those a year. You have to have 8 years of experience in the field as a correctional officer in a county jail facility. Medical inspectors have a different criteria. These folks are licensed, have to be licensed in the state of Florida, and they go through a 32-hour course. And we actually, a couple of years ago, combined that course so the folks in the jail side and the medical side are hearing the same thing, because it's not uncommon that those teams cross purposes. So we make sure that everybody is up to speed on all the standards. And then they go out, do the inspections, they document their findings. We arm them with the checklist and resources, also available on our website for you to look at. And they denote whether or not any of those standards are in violation. There's 2 types of violations. There's serious violations, and when you think of that, it's anything that's highlighted in there that has potential life, safety, health. For instance, there's an expectation that you'll have an annual fire inspection every year. If you don't do that, that is a serious violation that starts the clock on corrective action, that you have to submit corrective action plans, get that resolved within a 24-hour period. On serious violations, if we find that, there's a reinspection. We actually go back after the corrective action within that 48-hour period to make sure that what you said got done actually got done. If it's a notable violation, which is, okay, you're not in compliance, but it's not serious, it's not life-threatening, they still have to submit the corrective action plan, how they're going to do it, and verify that got accomplished. There are penalties. There are teeth in this statute, and all this, again, comes from the legislature. It's not something we made up administratively. That, if they're in non-compliance, there are financial penalties that scale based on how long it takes for them to get in compliance. And it basically says that if you're not in compliance, money from your inmate welfare funds, your commissary funds, penalty money from your operating funds will be transferred over on that scaled penalty scale over into your inmate commissary to benefit the inmates as a whole. So that's some of the penalties. There's one other penalty that's out there that, thank God, we've never had to enforce, but there is a penalty out there that says if for some odd reason that a jail administrator or command staff sheriff or whatever refuses an inspection, refuses entry for an inspection, those financial penalties then extend to them personally, come out of their salary for that. But we've not had that issue. Hopefully we never will. I'd hate to be the one to make that call. But in a nutshell, that overall 15,000 foot, that's what the Florida Model Jail Standards process is in our state.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a very impressive and comprehensive set of standards and an inspection process. So thank you for taking us through that. And I'm sure there's folks on who are viewing this from other states that may not even have standards, right? So I think that provides a really good overview of why it is important to have standards. So President Klucznik, let's talk a little bit about maintenance, right? A never-ending thing inside of jails, even when you do have really solid standards to follow. In your experience, obviously, if maintenance issues are left go, they can become safety and operational challenges or failures, however you want to look at it, right? So could you talk a little bit about that? And then thinking back about the Louisiana situation, kind of what did you see that should have given folks a heads up that there were things that they needed to be paying more attention to?
Sure. So even right now, right before this podcast started to be recorded, I got a notification that our water had to be turned off to the entire facility because of we've had some unusually cold weather in Florida, and the main water main going into the facility has got to be repaired. So at this point, it's been 20 minutes or so since I got that email. And operationally, is that going to be a problem for half a day? No. If it came down to half a day, if I started having no water for this facility for pushing a full day, and the inmates couldn't go down there, wash their hands, fill their drinking cups, flush the toilet, or the kitchen couldn't clean, the kitchen couldn't produce food because you got to use water to make food, right? That could be a problem really quick. So anything that breaks in a jail, listen, this is a facility that's operated 24/7 with oftentimes people that are living here 24/7. They don't really care about the building. So if they go out there and break something on purpose, which happens, there are times things are going to be down and quickly, especially with water. Anything that affects water or food is going to be problems if we don't get them remedied. There was a time here about 10 years ago where we actually had a flood that affected our facility to where we couldn't even drive in. And we were on a cusp of having to evacuate at that point, our 650 inmates to another facility because the plumbing, the sewer system was going to fail based on what the situation was. So that was interesting. God forbid you got to evacuate a jail. Think about the logistics and the safety potential risk to the public because of that scenario. Now, things break, especially when the building's running 24/7. Part of my building was built in 1988. They say that expert called they say that jails basically age 3 years for every 1 year they're operational. So this place is old. And we are doing a good job of keeping it running, but there are times where, like today, we got to turn the water off. We got to fix a main pipe. And if that extends any longer, then I got to start paying attention to the population to make sure we're not going to lose something. So, I mean, we end up having a disturbance or a riot because the place smells like feces or urine or something like that. God forbid that happens. We'd have to make some emergency provisions that we're prepared for if we need to. But this I didn't know this thing was cracked. We didn't realize it was cracked till this morning, and the plumber's already here to fix it. So we are, if something emergent happens, you call them right away, you get it handled. Luckily for us, we're in a situation where we can do that. From the Louisiana perspective, what I saw from the videos, from the still shots, obviously there's a whole bunch more to the story. The media puts out what they want to put out, and they skew it the way they want to. Whatever, if it bleeds, it leads. So in a situation where a piece of a broken facility was used for an inmate to attempt suicide, that's a nightmare. If you can't be sure of where all your structures are, if he's ripping a piece of metal off a ceiling to cut himself, that is just terrible. Now, would my sheriff or would in my role, it's my responsibility here, would I allow something to look like that or something to get that bad? No. But luckily we have a pretty decent relationship with our county commission. And honestly, in our scenario here, we're housing about 200 inmates that are from the federal government and from a neighboring county we're able to make our own money. And by resolution, the money that we're creating out of that pot is staying at the jail just for maintenance. And to talk about all the stuff from 15 years ago, that's how we put this place back together. We've been able to make our own money and control our own money and actually choose how we want to spend it when it comes to repairs and enhancements. I mean, we replaced the generators that we had here that for some reason seemed like they operated when they ran the not important stuff. Anything we needed to run wasn't on generator, but a few years ago, we spent about $1.2 million replacing all the generators here, not from local tax dollars, but from the federal government, mostly from the Marshal Service, giving us money for housing the prisoners. And now when the generator comes on, you don't even realize it happened. The air conditioner doesn't even kick off. The lights don't flicker. It's a much safer situation. But the scenario we heard about that you talked about at the beginning, the ad valorem taxes that are being directed towards that jail that create about $750,000 a year in a line item that's supposed to go right to jail maintenance. Based on the images we saw, nothing's happening. I don't understand what's going on there. And all the way down to the parish president being quoted as saying it's not his responsibility to make sure the place is painted. He just wants to make sure it's safe and operational. Well, it's not operational because people are escaping up there. And it's not safe because people are committing suicide using pieces of the facility. Now, listen, I don't know the whole story, but I know from what I saw image-wise, it's a failure of leadership one way or another. And if I had a budget of $750,000 coming in straight from the taxpayers, I would take that as a my mission to maintain the building. The taxpayers are putting this money aside, whether they want to or not, right? By their line item, by the way their county's set up or their parish is set up. It's my responsibility to make sure this building looks good, and that doesn't look safe.
Yeah, and certainly, one of the challenges in Louisiana and at all jails really are the divided responsibilities. It's obviously a leadership function to oversee the maintenance of a jail. But, you get situations like you just spoke about where, your water main coming in, there's problems with that, right? And talk about an example of a divided responsibility where it's really difficult for you to have influence over that situation, right? That definitely creates some unique challenges. And so, and then you talked a little bit about just, maintenance isn't just a cosmetic thing, right? And when you kind of go about it in such a way that is a cosmetic thing, and you're deferring the really heavy duty stuff, that's when you really open yourself up to some staffing issues and critical incidents and things like that.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Let's put it this way. Just because you don't think maybe the inmates, maybe that's your mentality, maybe you don't think the inmates deserve to have a freshly painted or clean facility. Life safety comes first, right? We got to make sure the life safety stuff is there. The lights are on, the cameras are working, and the toilets are flushing. But after that, there's a mental health factor that comes into play. If you're living in a dungeon, which we should never see in the United States in the year 2026, that's what I saw in that video. It looks like a dungeon. We need to recognize
Shaun,
that.
we concentrate a lot on suicide prevention. It's a big problem. And one of the greatest presentations I ever heard on that subject was that if you want inmates to not contemplate taking their life, then create a life that's livable within that environment. Prevent it before it ever gets to that point. To your point about, dungeonist environments, that there's certainly a mental health aspect.
Absolutely. And that goes all the way, not from just the inmate population, but from your staff. How are you going to keep morale high if you can't come in and feel comfortable in changing in a locker room or going to a clean functional bathroom to be a human? I'm not certain what that looks like in that facility. So I'm speaking in general.
Right.
It's for morale purposes on top of life safety. That's important just to have a clean place. I wrote an article in our magazine a few a few issues back talking about making sure that the locker rooms, the break rooms, and the bathrooms for staff are clean. It sounds petty, but it's important. You people will recognize a dirty place, and I wish if the default is it's spotless all the time, then you don't even think about it. But if you see something wrong, you got to address it.
Okay. And Cory, obviously, some of these issues do come up during inspections, right? And I'm sure you do encounter situations like Shaun talked about where, with the water main where they're just not able to fix the situation perhaps, or, God forbid they're not willing to fix it. What can you talk a little bit about some of the scenarios that you see in Florida with inspections and how those are addressed?
Sure. But one of the greatest benefits to having outside inspectors come from other facilities is that over time, there's this premise that I've coined the phrase, a fish doesn't know he's wet. So you're swimming around in your fish bowl every day. The jail looks the same as it did yesterday. And so you don't know there's a problem. You don't know that it's wet. You think it's just supposed to be like this all the time. And so bringing an outside person in who has no preconceived opinion or idea about how this place is supposed to operate and their ability to compare it against other jails that they've seen is a game changer. They're going to see things that you're just not going to see. You're going to walk by every day and think it's not a big problem. Or the big concern that I see a lot is we may see issues and just say, well, go back to what Shaun said earlier. They are probably already aware of that, so they will go out and fix it. If we ever meet this guy called he's single responsible for everything that's ever went wrong in an organization. So yeah, we go in understanding that inspection is a snapshot of the operation of that facility for that particular day. So it's certainly no substitute for what you're going to do internally in terms of a systematic, repeatable approach to this. But it does present an opportunity to catch these things. And yeah, we catch everything from, fire suppression systems and housing units that are inoperable. And that's obviously a serious violation. And what that causes us to do, and to your point about some of these things aren't quick fixes. That was at a very large metropolitan jail facility, thousands of inmates. And it was going to be a capital budget expenditure to make that happen. So it's not like they're going to fix that in 48 hours. Mm-hmm. So the commission takes that in consideration. They implement Fire Watch for all our former military and all that's in the audits. They'll be familiar with that. And jails where you have a physical human being documenting that you've checked for fire hazards in accordance with your policy. Those are some examples. Obviously, one of the things we find often is in the food service area, the operational maintenance of those items, the laundry. If the dryer's down, then the laundry, the weekly requirement that laundry be in process certainly isn't happening. So it's very common for us to find those. And the beauty of it is once they're found, the administration, once they're aware, they jump on it. There's not a hesitation to get it done because no sheriff wants to see his name at the end of the annual reporting year of inspections. Because when we share that, obviously, we report out that these were the issues of noncompliance and this is the county where they occurred. No sheriff in a room full of his colleagues during the Sheriff's Association executive board meetings want that to happen. So it's a little bit of a carrot and a stick. There's some oversight on it. Nobody wants to be embarrassed in that way. So it's very common, and they're very willing to fix and put the corrective action in place.
Yeah. And, when it comes to jail maintenance, the concept of you see it, you own it is obviously very important, and kind of trying to get away from that paradigm where it's always they, right, who are responsible for things.
I took my, when I was the jail administrator, I would take my shift supervisors, starting with them, and I would have them meet, and we would go out to the outside perimeter of the property, not the jail inside the secure facility, but the perimeter, the corner perimeter of that property. And I said, look out in front of you. What do you see? Because everything you see there, you own. So if the stop sign leading into the parking lot is not level and straight because there's winds that came through over the weekend and it's jacked up, everything speaks. That's another phrase I learned from some good colleagues in the hospitality industry. I've done a lot of working with folks like the Ritz-Carlton and those that they everything speaks. So if it smells, that's shouting something to you. If you don't care that there's cigarette butts all out in the front of the administrative entry area, that's telling something to all of your customers, your citizens, whoever's involved. So that all that needs to be dealt with. And then my hope is, and my desire was always, that would trickle down to the last person that ever got hired at that sheriff's office would understand that they have a responsibility, that if they see it in that moment, they own it. That's not to say that the person that identifies the maintenance failure or sanitation failure is going to be the one to necessarily go grab the mop or has a toolkit at his disposal, but it's their responsibility to make sure that happens, that the work order gets submitted, that there's follow-up. If you get everybody at your facility working in that mindset, including the inmates, and people, some of the people in my circles hate when I say this, but that inmate is a customer. That not only are they a customer in the world that we live in and the industry we're in, they're our product for those of you working reentry, transition, self-help programs. So we have to look at that. And involving the inmates in the solution, those inmate requests have to matter when they tell you that the sink's broken. That has to matter, and there have to be some sort of resolution to that. So when I say if you see it, you own it, that extends to everybody inside that organization, including the inmates. And we used to talk in that manner, where there's an expectation on our part that they report some of this stuff through the inmate request so that we know it's there, because we're not going to catch everything. Right. They will, they know, and they become a partner with you in that process.
Right. Yeah. So, Shaun, basically what Cory's talking about is the fine art of delegation, right? Which is a super important skill set for your command staff to have. And can you talk a little bit about how you do cultivate that culture that Cory's been describing, where everyone takes some ownership and you kind of shift that mindset with your staff, and, some of the challenges that come up when that doesn't happen, basically?
Yeah, there's you got to set the standard. And the standard starts at the top down. And luckily for me, especially in my facility, 15 years ago, I had that opportunity to kind of try to set the standard, being I was the only lieutenant at the time. And I had a lot of say on how to, put my fingerprint sounds horrible. Fingerprint on what we're going to be producing. And luckily for me, I'm going to mention his name by specifically. He's my shift commander today, actually, Mike Moffett, who's quickly to say, there's no such thing as, that's not my job, not here, right? So everybody, if somebody sees a door open or something's wrong, like Cory was saying, it's your job to fix it. If you can, report it, otherwise make sure it gets followed up on. But he's the guy that always says a clean jail is a happy jail. So if a clean jail is happy, that means odds are good, things are working, right? Your lights are on, the water's running, toilets are flushing, and odds are good, we're doing pretty well. If everybody's that focused, where we're polishing brass and not, working on something more heavy. But to Cory's point, if the inmate population reports something's broken, and they see that we are, not dismissive and not ignoring them, and you jump on it, next thing you know, inmate makes a report to my deputy, and the deputy calls maintenance, and maintenance is down there within 15 minutes to check it out. Well, they're more apt to want to jump in and maybe help out, make sure the showers are clean, and their cells are clean, because they play a vital role in making sure the place stays as clean as it does, especially when it comes to vermin and insects. We can't go down there and clean the cells. It's their responsibility, but they're more apt to follow the direction if the standard's set. And then they see that the standard's being met because they make a report, and we come basically flying down there to see what's wrong and see how we can get it addressed. but it comes down. It's from my perspective all the way down to the newest deputy on the floor, even the newest control room operator in the control room. Everybody has their role in identifying issues and making sure that they're followed through. All the way down to, I was not kidding, but polished brass and polished floors. Cory has yet to come to my facility, so this is my invitation next time he's in the area. I want him to come around just to see. Chris, you've been through my facility.
Right. Very impressed.
There were part of those, this is an old building, but there were floors that look like bowling alley floors, polished concrete, right? Beautiful.
Right.
I know Cory's seen pictures of it. We take great pride in that. And you know who's polishing those floors? Inmate workers.
Yeah.
And we can't do it without them. And they do have some kind of, especially, you know what? I'm going to flash back and give somebody some PTSD here. Flashing back to the COVID days, we cleaned the heck out of this place to where we cleaned so much paint was coming off the wall because, you know, we didn't know what COVID really was. You know, scrubbing walls, scrubbing hard surfaces all the time. And we had to paint when we started settling down a little bit to make sure those things were covered. But the inmates are a partner in making sure that your facility, they're a force multiplier. And oftentimes the deputy doesn't actually have to do the job, doesn't have to do the cleanup, or even sometimes don't even have to do the repair, as long as they're just supervising what's being done. And it's the culture, it's the no excuses culture. Well, I don't have the money for that. We don't have this, we don't have that. Okay, some of that is viable, but you can do things to make sure it's safe and operational. And if based on relationships, Cory talks about relationships all the time, you have to ensure that your relationships with all the way down to your inmate population, all the way up to your county administration, county, elected officials, and the sheriff, obviously, they have to have good relationships to make sure these things work.
One of the greatest things you can do as a leader is go to your staff, and I would encourage all the jail administrators listening to adopt this, particularly if you've just been appointed and you're the new guy there coming in to lead. When they're stuttering around, stammering around, trying to see who's going to take you on the tour and let's show you the facility, ask, the first thing you want to see is take me to every exterior mechanical room and open the door and let me look inside. Because if you open that door and there's empty Gatorade bottles, it hadn't been swept out, the plumbing and fixtures within that mechanical room have not been painted, that sets the tone. Because if the expectation is that the mechanical room be immaculate, then you're already communicating what you expect that cell block and particularly that kitchen to look like. That was one experience that I had the privilege as a jail administrator to get that opportunity. That was taught to me by a 40-year warden veteran that was a mentor of mine, that it's the little things. It's the little things. If you get that right, then that automatically communicates your expectation when it comes to housing units.
Yeah, that's a really solid observation, Cory. And you're right. I mean, most people, when they think about jail maintenance, the first thing that comes to mind is housing units. But obviously, there's a lot more to the facility. And Shaun, could you talk a little bit more about that? Some of the other areas that kind of create liabilities when they're neglected for the jail that we need to be focused on when we're thinking about jail maintenance.
Yeah, I mean, structure in general. We've had to replace roofs here. Replacing roofs is not a cheap endeavor, and you can really have some system failures pretty quick if you get some heavy leaks. We joke, and the picture has stayed up on and Chris, I think you saw it on the tour. We have a long hallway that connects our main building to our Bravo housing unit, and it used to leak from the ceiling, seep in through the walls, and the water would come up from the ground. When we first got here, until we had to spend a lot of money on sealing and underpinning and making sure that it was cleaned up and secured. But we have a sign on there that says Canal Street, and it's a laminated piece of paper that I had laminated and stuck up there with tape. And guess what? It stayed there for over 10 years at this point. It's become Canal Street. Everybody, even on the radio, we call it Canal Street. But in Florida, some big things that we deal with is HVAC. I don't have DOC's got a lot of prisons that don't have air conditioning still, but they have windows that can open, and if the power goes out here or the HVAC goes out, especially in the summertime, it gets warm quick, and that becomes a challenge to managing the population because they get hot and they get angry. But more importantly, which I'm proud to say this year, we haven't had an issue. Heat, it doesn't happen very often. We got to turn the heat on. So when the heat turns on in this building, you smell it. This year we haven't had I think medical went out for just a little bit. They got it fixed within a couple hours. And even the weatherman didn't help me yesterday because I think I have plants at home that died because it was supposed to be 44 degrees, but it was actually 31. So they were off by a bit. But I don't, the Florida Model Jail standards don't talk about extreme high heat, but they do mention it's got to be 60 degrees at the lowest in your facility when it gets cold. So, a lot of things can go wrong. And you think about all the things that can go wrong short of, causing an escape or a suicide, but even just, managing the building in general, just trying to keep the morale of both your staff and the inmates high. It comes into play big time.
Okay, thanks, Shaun. And Cory, we talk about this concept of institutional legitimacy and how that matters in jail operations. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, real quick, I want to follow up on Shaun's about,
yes, please do.
The different areas. Not, when you hear us talk about maintenance, it's very easy to talk about, well, you talk about the internal workings of the jail, but you also, you have your fleet vehicles. The transport vehicles, you have, your programming classrooms, areas that may be external from your secure jail. I know we had a very robust vocational program at the jail where I served. We were doing heavy equipment operating and welding and those vocational programs. But those areas, can't be left off. They need to be inspected with the same level of urgency. You've got in Florida, most of the county jail command staff actually run the bailiff programs and courtroom security. So you got to get out and go inspect those areas too. And again, to Shaun's point, the leader goes first. Yeah, legitimacy, institutional legitimacy. And I don't care if you're running a jail, a hamburger stand, an airline company. The reality is that at any time that any organization or institution is viewed as illegitimate, they don't mean what they say, they're not doing their mission that they're purported to be able to do, then the result from that is chaos and often disruption. That's why you've got, certain airlines that have YouTube channels dedicated to the fact that they don't do a good job. And there's people fighting on the planes and getting pulled off the planes. There's fast food restaurants the same way because they're not viewed as legitimate. So the result is an outburst. Everybody on this call has had some interaction with an institution organization where you felt like you weren't being heard or that the people weren't fulfilling their obligation. I had a stint where I was the chief deputy tax collector in what most states would recall as the DMV. When I tell you it's time for you to go to DMV, you get a certain reaction to that because you don't view it as legitimate. Well, in our jails, it becomes extremely important if we say we're going to be a professional organization and we've got, words on the wall that said we're committed to excellence and those things, then that has to translate into the subject that we're talking about now. If the inmates view that, to Shaun's point earlier, if they send a request or they notify a deputy and 15 minutes later they're fixing the problem, that builds up your bank of legitimacy. So then incidents of disruption, I don't know who else is going to be throwing stuff off the tier or whatever, but that guy probably ain't because he sees that these people are trying to do what they said they was going to do. There is a widely successful fast food chain out of Atlanta, headquartered in Atlanta, that really all they do is sell chicken sandwiches. I won't mention their name. If they were to ever come on board and sponsor the American Jail Association and partner with some of us, then, we might call them out. But I think most people will figure out who I'm talking about. And they own 26% of the market share in the fast food industry in the world, and they're closed on Sunday, and they primarily only operate in the United States. Why is it that we will get in a double drive-through 25 cars deep at that restaurant, but you'd never do it at any other fast food chains? It's because you trust what's going on in that building. Why do you trust it? Because you've had a consistent, repeatable, quality experience with that institution. This is the same thing. And when we do the little things like the maintenance, and I could go on and on. If you're doing rehabilitative programs and say you're about the business of building better people, then you need to be able to demonstrate that. You need to have examples of success and some efficacy behind your programs that says you mean what you say and you say what you mean. That builds what? Trust. Everybody wants trust and loyalty, but here's the rub. Those are emotions. You can't demand it out of the inmates. You only get that through an emotional connection that says, okay, their behaviors and their attitudes and their methods are following what they're saying. So it's extremely important to avoid disruption. And to Shaun's other point, if we got to go in these places and work 12-hour shifts and be with our colleagues and friends and try to do a good job, shouldn't we do that in a place that's clean, smells good, and is operating efficiently? Because there's a sense of pride and engagement and even employee satisfaction that comes from that. I guarantee you Shaun's people brag on the cleanliness of that place as much as he does when they're out on the weekends or doing whatever. When we get the inevitable question at dinner with friends who don't work in this is, what's it like? What's it like to work down there? That's what you want to hear on a Saturday night at dinner. But I guarantee you they voice, hey, our place is clean, it's ran well, and that permeates and actually begins to promote your culture.
Yeah, thanks. And some great observations and a really solid example of the power of institutional legitimacy when you get it right. So, Shaun, talk a little bit about when we don't get it right and things kind of go into a tailspin, and the staff and the inmates both lose confidence in the facility. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that presents when it comes to compliance and safety?
Sure. Luckily, I've never lived it. I've worked in 2 great facilities, and we've never had a problem with that kind of stuff. You know why? Because we actually communicate well. And I was just thinking as we're doing this that if my water situation lasts any longer, we're going to put out a message to the inmates on their tablets, just let them know the water's off. Here's the plan. Here's our goal to get it fixed, and have that communication. But the problem is if it's the other way and you're not actually communicating. Because if it goes any longer than a few hours, we're probably going to put something on Facebook too from the sheriff's office saying, hey, just FYI, in case your loved ones start to call you, we are working on this water issue. It's planned. We realize it was an issue, and we're going to communicate that. The problem is on the opposite is when you hide it and you don't talk about it, and then the inmates don't trust it, and so the bad situations start to happen. You'll see force being used more often, most likely trying to gain compliance. Or if you have an angry population, they tend to want to be angry, and they want to stay that way, and they're going to give your staff a hard time. You're going to see at that point the trickle down effect is staff starts getting sick, and they stop coming to work because they don't want to deal in an unsafe scenario, or you start having a staffing issue in general because people start quitting. Now that's an absolute extreme. I wonder, going back to our Louisiana concept, I wonder what the staffing level is up there. I'd have a hard time working in that facility based on the images I saw. I think everybody up there, especially the sheriff, seems to be wanting to get it right and wanting to try. But I wonder how he's staffing the place, because I bet you they're facing the same challenges we're trying to talk about. If I was trying to live in that facility, I'd be miserable, and I wouldn't want to. Listen, my house is spotless. Thank God for my fantastic wife, because I'm here at 4 o'clock in the morning. But I go home to a clean house, and I can't rest if it's not clean, right? So I think that's now to some of our population. Is that how they live? Sure, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people come here. They're here temporarily, and you hear about some people would never even get out of booking, and they start complaining that the place is disgusting and blah blah blah, and they're really just telling stories. I have no problem responding to the complaints. Come on in and take a look. My door's open. I don't have to wait for Cory's inspectors to show up to come look. Anybody that lives in this county that wants to take a tour can come take a tour. The county commission is more than welcome. Any elected officials welcome. Any judge, anybody off the street as long as they're, we're going to make sure they go through a metal detector, but they can come in and take a tour, and it's open. I'm not ashamed of that. We had 11 inspectors come through the facility 2 weeks ago for our planned inspection. 11's a lot, by the way, but there was 3 that were new and they were getting their first one. So we had some people to basically mentor them through. And what I like to hear, the place smelled clean everywhere. You couldn't find any odors. And when they say it's not just inspection clean, it is clean. There's a difference. You can tell the difference when you walk in and you can smell fresh paint because the inspectors are coming.
Yeah.
And more importantly, and believe it or not, and the sheriff is always confused by it. And I can't wait till he hears this part of this podcast. When the inmate morale is high and they have nothing to complain about, that says something. Because inmates are going to find reasons to complain, especially with people from the outside. And that was the report. The report, it was clean. Nobody ran from the inspectors, and the morale was high. So that's the opposite of what you're asking, Chris. Chaos can ensue, and bad things can happen. And when people start dying and getting hurt and getting sick, that's what can happen if you're not paying attention.
Shaun, a big part of our inspection process too, in our inspection techniques, is we expect and demand that those inspectors talk to inmates. They go in and out of those pods, segregation units, and make sure that's a critical part of what we require of the inspector, that they actually talk to the inmates about what they're seeing. So we do a customer survey.
Yeah, to Cory's point, I dare everybody who's listening to this to compare the requirements to become an inspector for the Florida Model Jail Standards. Compare that to the requirements of an ACA inspector. I know I'm not supposed to say those letters, but compare them. Florida's minimum jail standard inspectors are way more. There's such a higher level of requirements to become an inspector. 8 years, Cory just said, right? And a 40-hour class. Compare it. It's already on the website. Take a look.
Yeah. So you mentioned the situation in Louisiana, and I think there's always great value in looking at situations like that. And with jail administrators across the country and my interactions with them, there's definitely a sense of community, right? And sharing best practices and talking about the challenges that we have in jails. And obviously you see a lot of that in AJA's iConnect discussion forum. So let's talk about some of these specific cases and some of the takeaways from your perspective, both Cory and Shaun. Specifically one of the issues we haven't talked about with the New Orleans jail as an example, where we got into some of the infrastructure issues a little bit, but there were faulty cell lock mechanisms and lock tampering and a lot of things like that needed to be addressed.
Yeah, I don't mind starting this conversation. It's this is nothing new. I mean, you can go back as far as the New Mexico State Penitentiary riot that was infamous, that everyone's familiar with from back in the I guess it was the 80s.
Yeah.
A big contributor to that was maintenance issues, particularly key and lock issues, the secure doors, not being operable, that caused that thing to spread. That's one example. More recent here in Florida, we don't, some of this stuff's catastrophic and there's nothing really. It's just going to happen. I know we had the Escambia County Jail over in Pensacola years ago that had a flooding issue, and that wasn't the first time they'd had it. It was not that significant of rains, but the plumbing failed. That elevated up to where the LP gas that caused the heating and running the facility, and literally the jail blew up, and caused them for the next 6 years to have to outsource inmate housing while they literally had to build a new jail. So that's the big extreme versions of what can happen. Electrical systems failures that result in fires. We've seen several facilities across the country and in various states, and I'm trying not to just pinpoint locations, but everybody can read, that are now under federal consent decree or court ordered observation. And when you read the details of it, so much about the reason that they're under those conditions, it is, some of the stuff we all know about staffing or whatever, but an overarching theme is the cleanliness and maintenance of the facility is one of the primary reasons why they're under those guidelines and observations from, federal authorities.
Cory said it earlier, if you focus on doing the right thing and focus on the small things, I say it all the time. If you focus on the small things, you make sure in the housing issue, you make sure the inmates are wearing their uniforms properly and their bunks are made when they're outside their cell and they're wearing their ID where they're supposed to. They're in line for chow and not just, walking around and it's controlled. You focus on the small stuff, the big stuff just doesn't happen. Even shift to shift, outside of maintenance, even shift to shift. If there's a deputy, there was no bigger compliment than when I walk into a housing unit when I was deputy and I hear them say, "Oh crap, it's Klucznik," right? But it was, "Oh crap, it's Klucznik," but he's going to be consistent and it's going to be fair. But I was required to search 2 cells per shift by policy, and I would tell the inmates, I am required by policy, and this, that I have to search 2 cells, and somebody's going to invite me into their cell because they're not going to have their bunk made, or I'm going to see some contraband in their cell, and that's what's going to draw me in. I'm not going to just pick random 2 cells. I'm going to find ones that need attention. So if you are handling small things, the big things just don't happen. So if you're making sure the trash cans are emptied and the light bulbs are changed out, the big stuff just won't happen because you're on top of it. You're zeroed in on the basics, and it's day to day. And like Cory said earlier, everybody is part of the solution here, all the way down the inmate population. If everybody's handling the small things, then the big things just won't happen. Now, outside of a catastrophic flood and an explosion, yes, that was a nightmare and a situation I never want to be in. But I've had a fire in this facility in the laundry, and Cory would know exactly what happened because somebody didn't clean a lint trap. Yeah, that's what happened, right? That's small stuff that has to happen. I guess we have a routine now that doesn't happen ever again. Thank God. So it's the focusing on the small things definitely will help us prevent a big thing to happen later on.
Yeah, and when that doesn't happen, that's when you have your maintenance failures, right? And certainly, the inspection standards in all of these cases could have helped with intervention much earlier on and kind of resolve some of these issues before they became really big issues, right?
Yeah, one of the things, going back to inspector techniques, while they're there, when they're looking at these maintenance issues, they go back and look at previous work orders. What was the time that it took to resolve them? They look at preventive maintenance schedules. Do you have one? Do you know when it's time to paint, APOD again? When was the last time it was painted? When's the last time the generators were tested? Those are type things that they look at and try to highlight while they're there. And the other magic that happens, there's the standards, but then along the way, there are discussions, in particular those exit briefings, that are more technical assisted oriented, say, hey, we noticed this. It's really, it's not a violation of the standard, but at our facility, we did this to help improve in that area. So there's a lot of that cross transference, quality improvement that takes place that we don't even hear about, doesn't get documented. That's the beauty of having a group of people from another facility coming in.
Yeah, and so I think it's appropriate to wrap this conversation up to continue on some of the points Cory just made, Shaun, and talking about solutions a little bit, and how jail leadership needs to respond when maintenance standards are slipping.
Yeah, for me, it starts with don't even wait till they slip. You have to, and you guys heard me say this, I guess, when I was referring to the chicken sandwich place, but I'll put it back in here too. Your processes have to be systematic and repeatable and widely understood by everybody. So, okay, that starts, like we said, with command staff involvement. The jail administrator needs to walk through on occasion and go in those housing units. A former Secretary of Department of Corrections, another mentor of mine, Harry K. Singletary, since passed, but I'm going to honor him. And he said, you don't ever want to forget what the cell block smells like. No matter what level that you are in the organization, you don't ever want to forget or become ambivalent to that. So you have to go down there. Then you have to have a systematic routine. In most cases in Florida, it's a weekly formal health, safety, and sanitation and security inspection. That's normally done by a cross-functional team that's assigned. I like to include people on there from various disciplines. I don't care if they work in medical or whatever, but a cross-functional team that goes down as a unit and walks through that facility and fills out this sanitation report. If I were to ever just continually get the glowing report, everything's fine, we're fine, you're fine, everything's perfect, and there's never any deficiencies, then I would then have my bureau chiefs go down and do that weekly inspection. And after they did that, about 3 weeks, suddenly the standard weekly inspection began to improve, and we began to note some things that needed to be corrected. I mentioned preventive maintenance schedules. If you don't have one, that's something to consider. What are your long-term goals? That certainly helps you communicate to the decision makers on funding what your intentions are. Do you have a paint schedule? Do you have these things laid out on when you're going to try to accomplish them and routinely? It's no different than your house. I mean, I get an alert notification on my phone when it's time to change the air filter in the HVAC system. It's important to make sure that you do that. Certainly you want to have a comprehensive work order system of some kind. As a jail administrator, I looked at that stuff. I had it on my desktop. I had a sign on into that work order system, and part of my routine was to look at it and see what's being reported, and more importantly, how quick is this stuff being resolved. I know the approach to maintenance, and we haven't talked about this much, but the approach to maintenance differs for every facility. You've got some facilities that responsibility is delegated to the counties, public works, or they're folks that come in and out when they get to work orders. That can work. It was never ideal for me. I always like to have dedicated internal security staff that had a responsibility for that maintenance. Part of the benefit in having dedicated security staff is you don't have to escort these people around with their toolboxes and whatever. If it's a sworn officer, detention deputy that has that responsibility, he can escort himself around with the tool cart and do those things, and has a bit more ownership, because the county's being pulled, to go fix the light socket at the park or whatever else. They got to go make sure the air conditioning's working in the commissioner's office, or they can come over there and check the HVAC at the jail. Which one are they going to choose? So I like to have ownership of that in my jail in one form or fashion. And there are others that actually, contract this stuff out to private companies that are out there that provide for facilities maintenance. And then the last one, to make sure that you're, getting this right, is do involve the inmates. Make sure that they're part of the ongoing preventive maintenance efforts, and that there's an affinity for the fact that they report this stuff. I know a lot of jails that do some, when it gets to cleanliness and sanitation, it's not uncommon I used to go around and I'd recognize if a particular housing unit was maintaining and keeping it clean, and it was always, in my case, it was always CPOD where the females were just killing everybody on this, and they would get additional phone video visit time free and on the house for that week, because they were the dorm that got it right. So I would incentivize it in that way. So it needs to be systematic and repeatable. It's got to be, the funding for it has to be stable. And Shaun alluded to this earlier. I don't know what's going on in jurisdictions where they say we need the funding, but we're not getting it. But as a jail administrator, you're going to have to fight for it, because you're going in there competing with others who also have very valid needs. In my county, the firefighters, we actually oversaw, the sheriff's office oversees the firefighting EMS services. Well, you're in there at the table with them, and let's face it, my son's a firefighter EMT. They got a great advantage. They say, if we don't buy this, people will die. If we buy this, people will live. Well, how are you going to argue against that? Where we're over there asking for, a new transport van. I would get creative. I made the case for the need to upgrade some of our fleet vehicles, and it wasn't going so well in the budget hearing. So I moved the parking spaces for those vehicles to right up front, so that everybody that walked in and out of that jail had to look at those vehicles. And I remember my chief deputy coming to me and said, "What in the deal? What's going on with that car out there? Why is that thing still in service?" And so I sort of greased the wheels. Shaun mentioned about tours. Take your budget and finance people over in admin, take them down there, walk them through, show them where the pipes are, corroded or whatever it is that you're trying to resolve. Take the decision makers with the county, encourage them to come take a look at it. If they can't do that, what else is powerful? Photos and video. Take it to those budgetary meetings where you're talking to county administrators, or even if you're talking to your own finance director. Some of the greatest challenging conversations were with the finance director in the agency who didn't have a familiarity with jail. She's trying to do her job. She's trying to make sure that the money's lining up. But take them over and show them tools and equipment. And here's another thing that's important. I'm gonna hush because I could go on about the strategy. Vendor partners. They're crucial to this. There's some I could name that do, water mitigation and safety. Make sure those vendor partners, when you're having a conversation about their selection, that they have a process in place where they're going to be responsive for those components that they're responsible for. We're in this age, everybody's on electronic access control devices where one circuit board can take you out. Make sure that there's a plan in place to get those things repaired quickly. Hopefully there's some effort on those vendor partners to train staff on site that have the ability to do these quick fixes. And our vendors are always, catering to us and being nice to us and calling us and asking us how we're doing. If you've got vendors out there that are meeting that expectation and they're responsive, then you do well to call them and say, "Hey, I want to call and thank you for being so responsive when we had this issue the other day with your products or services," because they're essential to this effort to achieve excellence in maintenance in our facilities. And they're the ones coming up with the solutions. So the problems that you're having, it's important to go through and go through these vendor halls, meet these people, learn what they're doing, and be intentional about establishing a relationship with these humans.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Shaun, anything to add?
No, Cory's an expert. I love it. And it all comes down to relationships, standards, right, and communication, and saying thank you is great. And you know what? Sometimes I noticed that over the years, sometimes the vendor may not want to come back because the bill wasn't paid fast enough. Make sure you pay your bills. When you hire somebody to come in, work on something, make sure you get them paid. But it is long-term, establishing standards, holding that standard, communicating, and maintaining those relationships. And that goes from executive command staff all the way down to the inmate population. And that's going to help keep your jail safe and operating in a smooth way. Man, Cory, that was awesome. Good job. I appreciate that.
Thank you. It was good to be here. Before we close out, I do want to encourage everyone again, please go to our website, the Florida Sheriff's Association. It'll be in the notes and all that stuff, how to get there. But man, we've been in place since 1893. I'm going to humbly say that in terms of state associations for sheriffs, be hard pressed to find a group that does it any better. We have over 100,000 honorary members that support us, businesses, individuals, families. And we're not just in the jail business. We provide a lot of support to jails and sheriff's office in terms of competitive purchasing programs. We do a lot of specialized training. In the state of Florida, we have a specialty license plate that folks can purchase, and every dollar of that goes to support specialized training in things like suicide prevention, opioid addiction. We do a lot on human trafficking. We've got a lot of programs in place to support our law enforcement community, and with an intentional focus on jails. I'm so grateful for our executive director, Matt Dunnigan, who lets me emphasize the importance of corrections and corrections professionals. And we started, this will be our third year, we do an annual jail summit every year to bring these jail administrators together so they can visit and collaborate. And we have a series of conferences throughout the year. We have a Florida Sheriff's Training Institute website. So go to our website, learn more about us, and you can connect with me on there. I would love to hear from any of you guys, and tell me what you didn't like about this. If there are any of the resources that we mentioned that you would like to learn more about, if you'd like to be connected with a colleague that's in Florida, please connect with us in that regard. And so excited about Shaun's tenure as president, because what we've tried to do since that day is make sure that we're working hand in hand with the Florida Sheriff's Association and AJA to collaborate on initiatives like this. And we've done a lot at the national level since he's been in place. So it's been great having him as a partner this year.
Yeah, and thank you, Cory and Shaun. And you really drove home the importance of maintenance and inspections and standards. And so great conversation. And to our viewers out there today, Cory will be on tap at the AJA Conference and Jail Expo coming up here May 16th. If you haven't registered yet, you do not want to miss the premier training event for jail professionals. Again, it's May 16th in Milwaukee this year, and you can register online at aja.org. Also, I encourage you to continue the conversation on our discussion forums, iConnect, which are available online. Look forward to seeing you during our next episode.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing everybody in Milwaukee. I'll be the one with the accent if you can't find me.